This is Changeling the podcast.
Welcome to Changeling the podcast. Come for the glamour, stay for the vibes. I'm your host Josh, and with his other host Puka. Say hi, Puka.
I'd love to, but I really have to think through the repercussions of that act.
Oh, what are we talking about tonight, Puka?
Well, we are diving into. Did we come down on? Is it philosophy or philosophy?
Philosophy?
Yeah, I don't know if I can handle all of that. But yes, we are delving into the realm of morality tonight. I guess both in terms of diegetically as something in the game Changeling the Dreaming, and then
Yep.
within the setting, the Fae and how they think about good, bad, and, well, we know how they feel about ugly, but everything else.
Mm-hmm. Well, actually, that gets tied in good and bad and ugly for
Yeah.
them, especially. So yeah, so this is a overview.
A mishy-mashy debate thing.
Yeah, so we are talking about systems of ethics, and we're talking about different ways. And I thought I'd give a very brief 101 on meta ethics, or the ethics, the study of ethics, or as opposed to what actually is good, but how do you talk about ethics?
As someone who went to a school world-renowned for its philosophy program and couldn't
Yeah.
stand the philosophy classes they were in, I'm going to let you
Uh,
handle this.
yes. Well, I never actually took any of them in university, but anyway, so maybe all of this will
Nevertheless.
be wrong. um, yeah, I think of there being like three broad categories of ethics. You could have something called deontology, which is like, is this action right or wrong? Do you do the right or wrong thing? The whole question is, what did you do?
Hmm.
There's consequentialism, which is about what actually happened, right? Like what is utilitarianism is the most
Hmm.
talked about, I think, form of consequentialism, but it's like what you did only matters in terms of what results they create. And then virtue ethics, which is not as popular these days, but used to be really popular, and actually pretty relevant in other World of Darkness games, which is about you have like these different virtues or vices you're trying to, brave. Are you honest? Are you compassionate? I mean, what the virtues are could vary, and you're trying to cultivate and make yourself more virtuous, and that is the right thing to do. And then the results will just come from there.
Hmm.
So
I think I'm the second kind, but I'm not sure.
I don't think any of this really applies for me. I think we're like talking. I am not a system of ethics, so
I mean, like, if I had to take an online personality quiz that
yeah,
sorted me into one of these three, I imagine
yeah.
I'd end up in the second bucket.
Okay,
But yeah.
I have a very very dorky thing where I think of consequentialism is the lowest level maybe way that you could talk about it, but it's so low level it's completely impractical most of the time. So you could maybe rate strategies based on the consequences, but like you can't
Hmm.
actually plan out everything you're going to do because you don't know the consequences, and fully getting all the information, that's a lot of work, and you could have been doing that work doing other good things. So
Like cantrips,
yes,
for example.
but we could sort of use this as sort of a framework when talking about Fey ethics, because I think could describe them in different ways along these lines.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, what do we want to talk about changeling specifically?
Well, so that kind of discussion raises the question of whether or not we even need to model this kind of thing in a game in the first place, mechanically or otherwise,
Hmm.
and going into morality traits as a concept in the world of darkness. Should Changeling even have one? Because, the standard for this is Vampire the Masquerade, which has a humanity track
And virtues. It uses two
and
different things.
virtues, yeah, which can vary as well,
Yeah,
depending
so
on
it's
how
both deontology and virtue ethics of
yeah.
vampire.
And, like, I don't want to get into the whole weeds about passive enlightenment and all that stuff,
Yeah.
but I think it's important to point out that humanity as a trait, the kind of gold standard before that, and I guess still gold standard for lots of people, is the Dungeons and Dragons system, where you have
Mm-hmm.
the good neutral evil axis and the lawful neutral chaotic axis.
Yeah, the system that designed to make you just argue about what any of this means. So I guess that's philosophical.
Yeah. So what are your thoughts on the humanity trait as a concept?
I think it's a great way to show not hypocrisy or show these characters are not okay. The whole problem with it as morality is it's by introducing it, it's no longer a morality system. It is a practical concern for avoiding the beast and a bunch of other like selfish end goals. It is not about morality.
Yeah. You can do a cost benefit analysis of all of your
Yeah.
actions in relation to what it's going to do to your character sheet.
Yeah. As much as it's your character is aware of, I mean, that gets the whole thing too, is like, how much is your character aware of this? What level? But there is some level of that. And it's like, well, if I follow these in the humanity weird sometimes set, this isn't about vampire.
Well, yeah.
But anyway, it's weird.
Putting aside the question of how the hierarchy of sins is actually organized.
Yes. And what it means for it's like, oh, if I have a higher conscience, I can get away with doing more crime? What? There is something similar in Changeling, though, when we talk about banality. It's a pseudo-morality?
In the sense, I think you have to like follow a couple of steps to get there to make it that. Like you have to accept that the Fae themselves conceive of glamour and banality in a certain way, and then how it relates to the actions that they do and the impact they have on themselves and each other. But it's not intuitive, certainly, to a player. Like you kind of have to learn how that system works.
Yeah, but it is kind of like, I mean, depending on C20 seemings, but like it's like, oh, killing another character gets you a banality check. Doing it with cold iron is like guaranteed point dot of banality. Hurting chimera banality. Like a lot of the banality things are kind of like, it feels like it's supposed to be moral a little bit to me.
Yeah. But at the same time, you don't get those for harming humans, generally speaking. So
they're those from a Fae perspective. Those aren't. Anyway, we'll get into what that means from a Fae perspective. But yeah, for the most part, most of Changeling morality, there's no this happens and you roll dice and then your points change type system.
The exception of like Nightmare and Bedlam.
Yeah, and that's
a whole separate.
I mean, I don't think the old Bedlam checklist was really ever I guess some stuff like ravaging. I guess ravaging, but that's not really. I don't think it was saying partying's bad or anything.
No. Yeah. Well, and I wonder sometimes because like I'm not against the concept of having a morality system of some kind within a game. I think because my sense is that maybe players nowadays might have forgotten that when the White Wolf games came out, it was pretty novel to be, quote, playing the monster. And the game, at least they were trying to mechanize that in a way that required you to remember that. But like you said, if you mechanize it too much or too overtly, you kind of undercut the drama of the narrative.
I know of other games that do it differently where it's not about, oh, you want to be good or else bad things happen to your character, but it's if you behave in certain ways, it has consequences for your character.
Yeah.
And it changes who they are. That can work better, I think, as a system if you want that system. It's almost like a consistency of personality, and specifically in the moral domain sense, like, oh, I'm not going to be murdering kittens one day and saving kittens the next day. Or okay, that's a silly example, but like you could do things like that, or like it changes who you are. But Changeling doesn't really do that either.
Yeah, I forget if I told this anecdote before about how. See, it's interesting to me when you see people who are like trained on Dungeons and Dragons playing Vampire for the first time, because Vampire, I must admit, is kind of the intro World of Darkness game for a lot of players. And I was playing in a game where you could tell like who had played this before and who hadn't. We were entering a situation where we had to like figure out what was going on at this mysterious construction site, and there was this group of 5 mortal construction workers or something. And we had a coterie of 6 vampires, and each of us kind of described the approach that we were taking. And those of us who had played Vampire before and we were all on the path of humanity. The 3 of us kind of described sort of our careful way of handling this, and the other 3 just straight up murderated all of the mortals. So, and they all failed their degeneration checks and lost humanity, and one got a botch and became a megalomaniac. And there was this kind of like, they were taken aback, like, oh, oh wait, there's consequences for this. And that's
Yeah.
not something you generally get in D&D. So I think
Yeah.
it does make it valuable to have that, particularly for a game like Vampire. It just raises
Hmm.
the question of whether Changeling fits into
I
that.
as much as I would tweak it, I think having a system like that in Vampire makes sense because it fits with the themes. And
Yeah, yeah.
Changeling, I don't think is, first of all, like one imposed morality would be really weird, and also, yeah, I could think of maybe something around the courts, and we'll get into courts.
Well, on the subject of one imposed morality, so we're going
Hmm.
to kind of be folding in some of the listener questions because there was a healthy debate, let's say, in
Hmm.
the episode
Yeah.
channel on Discord. And a lot of these kind of weave into the questions that we put together as well. So in the channel, Ruguru had asked, concerning the alternative morality the Fae possess, does it come wholly from their Fae souls? Changelings are supposed to be an amalgam of human and Fae, so how often does that part of themselves show itself in their personality? Relatedly, I had put down this question: how do cultural notions of good and evil, derived from or reinforced by the same myths that birthed the Fae, play into changelings' approach to
Mm.
their actions? So that it is that question of you have all of these kiths from a diversity of mythologies, and those mythologies, the moral traditions that they encode may vary widely.
Yeah.
We don't really get a clear answer about this in the text, nor any way to really mechanize that, I think.
Yeah. I mean, a lot of it is very individualistic. Like your
Hmm.
character is who they are at this given time. And we did have weirdly some early, like especially 1E stuff around the she, like would now be called Arcadian she only,
Yeah.
where because the courts are closest we get to two different codes of morality,
Yeah.
and your legacies have a moral character to them to some degree, or personality. Like you could fall into your other court legacy because of how you're acting or your situation that's happening to you. All the change, like their Kithane can shift,
Hmm.
but the she were supposed to be extra vulnerable to that, I guess, or extra likely to happen.
And when you consider that the Sealy are kind of like, the code that they follow is sort of a distillation of romantic, epic, Western European, chivalric,
Hmm.
et cetera, et cetera. It's a very narrow kind of.
Well, it's narrow. What I like about them both, though, they're not quite human still. Like the
Mhm.
even the way I like thinking about a changeling character is I think about like how it would be in terms of the extremes, and then temper that with the sort of human side, if that makes sense.
It makes sense, but I just think that the two complications that we would have for figuring this out from a game perspective is that first, players might be playing characters and kiths from cultures not their own, and therefore may not have the background to know like
Yeah.
what Greek morality was like 500 years ago and how that might
Oh, but I'm
factor
not caring
into.
about what Greek morality's like. I'm caring about like what the codes say
Yeah, but
and
I'm
things
just
like
I'm
that.
saying at another level you have to consider the individual kith cultures that
Hmm.
overlap with that. And then on top of that, no culture is going to have a fully unified set. Like even within a culture, there's going to be different codes that have evolved over time.
And especially since the Fae are not supposed to be regular, normal, expected members of these human societies. They are strange creatures from these societies. They're on the outskirts. They are things that were conceived of. They're often monstrous. They may have moral aspects of them where it's like an inversion of that culture's society. So,
All that being said, from a game perspective, from a design perspective, there's a powerful motivator for having something like Vampire's humanity as a lowest common denominator
mhm.
set of principles. So when
Yeah.
you think about things like murder, which is generally considered a bad thing across cultures, unjustified
Hmm.
murder, or you have something
Yeah.
like the incest taboo or whatever, again, what those principles are and how they're organized, we can probably do better than Vampire. But I do think the idea is worth keeping in the mix.
And well, and there's also like, what do you actually want to have at your table, whether or not. But that's another
Yeah.
story. Like some topics, it's like a lot of gamers seem okay with murder much more than they would be in real life compared to incest.
Right. Or like
But
assault or whatever. Yeah.
yeah.
Also, just as a sidebar, all of what I'm saying here about having a trait, I would personally also try to apply to Mage, and I wish
Yeah.
Mage had stronger tools to highlight it, but I think it's even weaker than Changeling.
I think even among the core Kithane, it's too diverse to work that way as like
Yes.
a more a hierarchy or.
So I did give this some thought. about
Yeah.
what a morality trait in Changeling could look like, or what a system could look like. And my suggestion would be two things that I would want to bring in. First is to maybe apply something like the weird stat from Lost to Glamour, in the sense of the more you lean into your Fey side, the less human you become, and thereby less subject to human morality. And
Yeah.
maybe it would be something like with the Mists, like if your banality is
Yeah.
also high, then that kind of evens it out.
I'd want to maybe invert that and make it, the more you're leaning on that power, the more your Fey morality starts taking hold and starts compelling you or something. But yeah.
Yes, but are those mutually exclusive is kind of the open question
Yeah.
there. And I think that each kith and the dream that they come from would probably have their own particular strain of what
Hmm.
Fey morality as a separate thing would
Yeah.
look like.
Yeah, the Kith books talk about, like, I mean, some classic examples would be the Puka are not big on honesty.
For
Red
example,
Caps certain have slew a, but I one thing I like is we do get, for the Kithane, we get those codes, and I like thinking about like how that pushes things into a inhuman way. Like even the Sealy code, like, you have death before dishonor. Well, you don't have to think too hard about how that could be pretty monstrous. Like beauty is life, never forget a debt. Like
sure, but I'm talking about even separate from the codes. Like I'm talking individual kith level.
yeah, I don't know. A lot of the kits are pretty broad too, so it's kind of
It's true. Leading from that, the second part that I would bring in would be something almost like the Yava from Bastet, where each
mhm.
kith has like, I guess it'd almost be like a secondary set of frailties, but less tied to things like compulsions or their metaphysical nature, and instead more tied to the mores of the culture that they come from, derived from myths. Some
Mm.
frailties, I guess, are
But
like that.
again, it wouldn't. I think a lot of it should be inverted from the culture that they come from. Like
Perhaps,
it would
yeah,
be
yeah.
what the culture considers it, but like a lot of them would be taboo for their culture deliberately.
Yeah. Well, and the stories encapsulate that by
Yeah.
modeling what these characters do in the stories.
Hmm.
And what we're given to model this kind of thing in the game are the banality triggers, which they're not exactly morality checkpoints. So I think you'd have to
No.
incorporate the there's a thing in V20, and I forget the name now, where it's like as you decrease in humanity, mortals become more and more uncomfortable around you.
No, that I don't like, because now that's getting back into, it stops being about morality and starts being about consequences, like practical
Perhaps.
consequences.
But we need something better than banality triggers is my point.
Yeah,
'Cause-
yeah, yeah. Banality tricks are just another concept. But like there is things where you have to spend a point of willpower to act in a certain way, or to avoid acting in a certain way,
right,
or make
right,
a
right,
rule
right.
to it. Those I think also are very, like I said with the puka, like telling the literal truth is it's like almost like a taboo or bad thing about them. Trolls, I mean, are pretty straight. I guess they have a consequence with the Titan's power, but
But so for something like trolls, so if we want to lean
yeah.
into the Viking heritage of trolls, does that mean trolls are generally more okay with murder the more they lean into their trollness? You know what I mean? That kind
Mm.
of, and however accurate that might be.
Yeah.
But all of this, I would say, is kind of an awkward coat of morality paint over glamour and
Well,
banality.
that gets really. You want something really awkward that way. You like look at the Aethu, right? Like they're
I try not to.
no, but like this is sort of we're talking about cultures where ritual purity and cleanliness are important. These are supposed to be the bad guys, therefore they're not. And yeah,
Yeah.
it's like it comes a stereotype about the culture they're from. That's, I don't think, accurate at all, but some people might think that anyway. Yeah.
Yeah. Overall, it's also a system that would more explain and justify why a changeling is acting immorally or at least inhumanly.
Yeah.
So,
But I think just encourage, like there's a lot of, not system, but there's a lot of text about it too. Like there's a lot
oh,
of,
sure. Yeah, yeah, yeah.
yeah, even the Kith write-ups, the Kith books, all sorts of stuff is about like how they see things, and I think a lot of the time you can get an idea of how this Kith would view morality differently.
But it's very easy for a player to decide how much they want to lean into that or not.
Yeah, that's
And I
good, I
don't
think.
know. Yeah, well, do you think we've reached the point where there's enough nuance in role playing for people to be able to do that on their own as a general rule? Or do you think it
I
should be
was certainly
something?
there in the '90s, and I think it's been there
I'd,
ever
I'd like to
since.
think I was too, but I
Yeah.
don't know.
No, I think like, I mean, Changeling is a very broad game. If you want to make a specific focused story game about that, cool. But yeah, having too much hardline rules around it, I think makes the game less fun and less able to experiment and less able to be like, oh, I'm going to interpret red caps differently than what this says,
Yeah,
but
that's
it's still
fair.
going to, yeah.
I guess just because going back to that opening statement about how much is Changeling a game about you're playing a monster.
Yeah.
And to be clear, if there were a system like this within the game, I would want it to be more optional and modular than it is in Vampire, for example. But
Hmm.
I wouldn't mind it if it existed because I think people sometimes sidestep it way too easily.
I think like people should talk to their groups. And I
Well, yeah.
think if somebody just wants to play the game in a way you don't want, maybe don't play with them. I don't think the
Yeah,
system's going to fix that.
perhaps not.
Now, if there's systems inclining things towards play that nobody really wants, that's where I more see the problem. But or a blank slate problem or like blank page problem. That's a whole other thing. What is the role of system in Changeling the Dreaming? Is probably
Yeah, well, or indeed any role playing game.
yeah.
So, following from that, there are two questions. So, Yorubi first asks, most people understand that Seelie and Unseelie is not the same as good and evil, but what about glamour and banality? What I mean is, have you ever had a banal figure in a game that could also be deemed good? And then Nicholas kind of followed up and said, building on that, can a person, action group, or the like be glamorous and immoral? So, first of all, yes. Um, but
Hmm. I mean, glamorous and immoral. There's lots of
yeah, of
examples.
course. But it certainly seems like the game wants players to understand that changelings, at least, think of glamour as good and banality as evil, or at least banality
Hmm.
as evil, which is already kind of a phase specific morality. Because you can certainly
Yeah.
find cases where glamour is derived from acts that most all humans would find reprehensible, and vice versa.
I don't think it's most changelings would see banality as evil. They'd see banality as bad. It's like heart disease or
But then what about like an autumn person, and really an autumn person who is malicious in their use of banality?
well, that's malicious then.
Where do you draw the line between evil and malicious then?
I wouldn't, but not all autumn
Okay.
people are malicious.
Not all, but ones who are.
Then they're being evil, sure. But you can also be a malicious dreamer. Like it's not there
Yeah.
C20 does have some stuff like the way they handle Dantean is just, but that's not really about
Yeah.
banality,
Oh,
it
I'm
says
getting to
anymore.
that. I have that further down in my
Yeah.
notes.
But like I was in a game one like I mentioned this character with my first changeling character, long gunning LARP, and his mother was an autumn person and she came and like almost destroyed a freehold. Her son had run away and showed up with a bunch of weird adults who were hanging out at like this I don't remember if it was a bar or whatever, and like she had been looking for him for like months, and she comes in right, and like that's not really malicious or evil, I don't think.
Well, putting aside, because the lines between words like evil and bad and malicious, I mean, we could split hairs
Hmm.
about those all day. Fundamentally, I think changelings, as they're presented in the game, would regard banality as an inarguable bad thing, and the people who actively push it onto them are
Hmm.
bad people to them.
Certainly in C20 has more of that. Previous
Yes.
editions, I would say, was much less. Like there was more, and it depends on your age. Like a childling would typically view things that way. A grump would be a lot more nuanced about it.
Yeah.
Like,
But that's the thing, is that there's always going to be counterexample. I mean, plenty
hmm.
of people listed counterexamples for each of those broad categories in the episode
Yeah,
channel. But
but you also have like what's good for a human is not the same as what's good for a changeling, and what's good for a true fake non-changeling
yeah.
is also different.
So changelings are humans too. So
Yeah,
my own question related to this was, how do the epiphanies map onto morality?
I mean we do have like rhapsodies generally seen as this horrific act.
I'd say
Um,
rapture is probably the most moral, or the most
maybe
likely to be, because it's, I guess, most likely, least likely to involve other people.
yeah, ravaging seem like a necessary evil in a sense. Like it's like I don't know, one of those things like a lot of people do, but they just sort of feel a bit guilty about, but they do it anyway, kind of thing.
And then there's revelries, which it depends on the kith, I guess.
Yeah, you would generally, from a broad sort of, what is your ethical view on it? They'd probably see Rhapsody and Ravaging as bad, and just about everything else is good outside of that.
Yeah. Well, the fact that the game sets up musing as the Seely's primary method and ravaging as the
Yeah.
unseely's primary method, as well as couching ravaging and ultimately, using and generating more banality, which is a net negative for the Fae. Not to mention the terminology. I mean, calling it ravaging, that seems to
Yeah,
set up some kind of position on it.
I do in my games tend to have quote unquote evil musing and good ravaging.
Yeah. Which, again, there was healthy discussion about in the episode channel, and I
Yeah.
appreciated
And
seeing
we
that.
even used to have it like that's how you get someone out. You ravage someone in Bedlam, and that can help them get out of Bedlam, kind of thing, and things like that.
Or muse someone to commit murder. It's like, oh,
Yeah.
not so great.
Mm-hmm.
The concept of dark glamour as mechanized in Harbingers of Winter but introduced elsewhere,
Yeah.
that almost feels like an attempt to more directly add like a morality access to the acquisition and usage of glamour.
Yeah. I don't like it. But...
As a side question to that, Terry asks, are there any groups that oppose musing as it instrumentalizes a person? Not that I'm aware of.
Yeah.
I could imagine Fae who are able to gather glamour from nature, some of them might feel more comfortable with doing that than gathering
Yeah.
from humans,
I
depending on
was
how
thinking
they...
Kinane who might think that.
Yeah, they might.
Because it has to be somebody who knows enough about Fae Society but isn't a changeling. I think might have a view on that. It still wouldn't be. I think most would just never even thought about it, and then if you brought it up, it would do a combination of some would get mad and some might just be sort of confusedly uncomfortable.
Yeah. I suppose, though, it's interesting to think about, is there some kind of changeling, I don't know, religion even, ascetic movement that believes you should only gather glamour through rapture or maybe revelry if you don't have
Like a
access to the...
almost a
Yeah,
Jainism
kind of,
style.
yeah.
Yeah, that could be interesting.
Yeah,
I think they would be seen as the extremist weirdos by most of Fae
of
Society,
course. Yeah.
but
And also in terms of the relationship that a changeling has with a dreamer that they muse. I mean, obviously, the vast majority of them, for their own benefit, are going to see it as a mutually beneficial relationship.
yeah,
I suppose, though, it also depends. We don't get a lot of from the dreamer's perspective about what musing is like. And I feel like we could use more of that.
yeah. I don't think you could really, even when I'm talking about this dark musing stuff, I don't think you could muse a dreamer to do a thing they don't want to do exactly.
Hmm.
It's not mind. I've heard people things like about psychic mind control. Like, no, you have to just help this person get over their blocks or
Right.
whatever,
It's
stopping them
enabling.
from. Yeah, it's enabling, and it's just any human can muse or ravage, right? But they just don't get the glamour benefits.
Yeah. Gross as it sounds, I wonder if milking glamour might still be the
Hmm.
best analogy for
Yeah.
that. Like, it's not necessarily harmful, but
Yeah, I mean, it's even more subtle than that. It's not milk. Yeah, it's
it's gross. But so putting aside glamour and banality and kind of going back to the courts. So
yeah.
yeah, Seelie and Unseelie. Well, you read out the codes, but wait, did you read out the code? You read out the
I only
Seelie
read
code, did we?
I only read some of it. I didn't go through it all. Yeah.
Okay, should we just give the pointers
Yeah.
again?
So for the Sealy code, you have death before dishonor, love conquers all, beauty is life, never forget a debt. For the Unseelie code, you have change is good, glamour is free, honor is a lie, passion before duty.
Would you call these, I guess, is aphorism the right term? Adage?
I'm not sure.
Guiding principles.
Yeah. These are almost virtues. We're talking about.
Yeah.
These are stating what the virtues are. Yeah.
So then kind of parallel to that and colored by the different chords, we have the escheat as well, which is more social compacty, but I'd say is still kind of
Yeah.
a co.
It's a set of laws. It's about law and
Yeah.
justice, but that definitely gets tied into morality. So the sheet, which I think originally was very much a Concordia thing, and now is just supposed to be a general thing.
Yeah.
But these are broad laws that get interpreted differently by different things. But you have the right of demens, which is like a noble's in charge of things. The right to dream, mortals have the right to dream unhindered by fey needs. the right of ignorance, changeling forbidden to betray the dreaming to banality, the right of rescue. All Cathane have the right to be rescued. This is all Cathane specific, by the way, these sheets.
Mhm.
All Cathane have the right to be rescued from banality, the right of safe haven, all places of the dreaming are sacred, and the right of life. No Cathane may spill the life bread of another Cathane.
Yeah.
That's very specific. I would like some of the other Gallian groups, actually. I wish they had their own codes, at least some of them, where it makes sense. But
They probably do. We just don't get to see what they are.
yeah, I would like to see them, yes.
Yeah. So I guess the escheat and the two sets of codes, the sets of principles and the two
Mhm.
codes, they don't really have much to do with each other in and of themselves. But it makes me
Yeah.
wonder if, like, we get to see the Seelie take on the escheat and the unseelie take on the
Mhm.
escheat multiple times.
Yep.
So I don't know if it's possible to kind of align Seelie and unseelie with like the different buckets of moral philosophy that you were outlining at the start.
Yeah. I mean, the Seelie are maybe more inclined towards deontology and virtue ethics, possibly mostly to virtue, depending on the
Yeah.
Seelie. And the utilitarianism, if you have to pick any ethical thing, there's also something called pragmatic ethics that gets talked about, where it's more, it's less the rule and more what do you actually, like, what are the consequences, or screw the rules sometimes, depends on the Unseelie.
Yeah, I mean, with my limited understanding, I can agree with that. Or conversely, maybe saying Seelie, it's deontology, unseelie, it's the second one. What is it again?
Consequentialism.
Consequentialism. And then they're
Yeah,
both virtue ethics, but just with totally different virtues.
that could be it too. Yeah.
Yeah. And of course, there's specific elements we can problematize, most obvious of which is probably honor, which we've dealt with multiple times.
Yeah. Yeah. Honor is the only thing that has to be in conflict between the Seelie and Unseelie based on their codes, at least.
Yeah.
Everything else is kind of like, you could make a character who follows, you have to pick where you're going to be on honor, the tenets of the codes, both codes.
Hmm.
You could like follow all of them, except you have to pick which one or the other on the honor.
Yeah.
And you could be perfectly consistent in your actions.
And honor is the one concept among all of these that I would say is intimately tied up in questions of morality. So it makes sense that it's the
Hmm.
most complex of them.
Which is funny because I find honor to be the most morally reprehensible concept, but that's a whole other.
Are you familiar with any ways that it's dealt with in like formal moral philosophies?
I mean, deontology fits well with honor because
Hmm.
you're supposed to behave honorably. And then virtue ethics, I think sometimes honor was considered a virtue,
Yeah.
but
Whatever it might mean.
yeah, because honor gets tied into different things too. It's not necessarily moral; it can also be how you fit into society. Your honor can be impinged by others' actions and things.
Mm.
Family honor, that kind of thing. That's why you get honor killings. Like,
Ugh. And this is the question that probably has the most ink spilled on it in the book. So clearly it's
mhm.
something the Fae themselves debate.
Yep. And it's one of those, like, I wonder what it was like before the shattering kind
Yeah.
of.
In any case, I guess, is it at all clear how their conception of good and evil might map onto these different approaches?
What do you mean?
Well, in the sense of like, would a Seelie say that a changeling is more or less good depending on how closely they follow the Seelie code? And then would an unseelie say that a changeling is more or less good? I don't know, depending on how much they don't, or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, it depends on the Seelie and it depends on the change. Like, I think
Yeah.
really hewing strongly to either code is more of a less human side to them,
Mm.
as opposed to just you happen to behave honorably because that's who you are. The Unseelie, especially, I don't know if they see it. I see the Unseelie code as a moral. Like, if somebody's more unseelie than them, will they look up to them morally? I'm not sure that would happen.
Would it be possible to say that the more inhuman a changeling is,
Hmm.
the more they associate inhumanity with maybe not good, but like, I mean, virtue,
Desirable.
propriety,
Yeah.
which is in and of itself kind of an inhuman. It's like,
Yeah. Yeah, I could see that.
as a side question to this, We also have the question from Europe first again. I'm curious now, what exactly are the general moral philosophies people consider the changelings to have? We've mentioned humanist and traditionalist. How do we define those, and what others are there? I didn't scrape through the
Oh.
channel enough to know what humanist and traditionalist are referencing here,
Oh,
but
I think that's referencing the do you remember back in like Fool's Luck and some of those other books, and like whenever
oh,
there's the
okay,
shining
I see.
host, all the political impulses?
Yeah, yeah, yeah.
And I mean, political impulses are also hard to disentangle from morality. So
I thought that those were more. Well, I'd have to go back and reread those, I suppose. But I mean, I would surmise that the changelings would see Seelie and Unseelie as their two main moral philosophies. The Kithane, I should say.
yeah, I think that's a big one. And but it's also Seelie and Unseelie are political camps. Like
Yeah,
there's definitely a lot of this is one of the places where changeling comes across as very American to me, where you have these two big political camps that are considered very important, and it's important to know which one you sort yourself into, and what exactly it means to be in that group besides saying that you're in that group is very vague and nebulous, and everyone disagrees. So
yeah. I take it a little bit differently. I I hear and appreciate your comment. Um,
yeah.
But as we've pointed out many times before, it's possible for an unseelie fae to participate in and hang out with the seelie court and vice
Yeah.
versa. And that they may have a harder time, they may be in the minority, but it
Hmm.
complicates that alignment to an extent.
And it's not like there's this big sign over your head that says which court you're in right now and what your legacy is.
Maybe there should be.
Yeah, you could be either court like in your heart or in your legacy or whatever, but still, like I said, the only thing that really contradicts is honor, and you have so many unseelie she at least who are big on honor, plus the trolls. Like it,
Yeah,
it could you could be all in on one court, but like actually follow the tenets of the other.
yeah. Can you be an eschetist? Is that a moral philosophy we can include in the mix?
Yeah, there is the thing connection where it keeps implying, and it kind of makes sense that like the sheet is. It's not like the unseelie hate the sheet generally, but like the seelie like it more than the unseelie like it,
Yeah.
or stick to it more. I think it's more important.
I think in both cases, it's kind of a matter of flexibility. Like, I
Hmm.
think the Unseelie probably treat even their own Unseelie code with some, yeah, sometimes these are more guidelines than rules kind of
Yeah,
approach.
there's a lot of unseelie too who are like, okay, you are seelie, that's cool, but it's like they would be annoyed at somebody trying hard to be unseelie when that's not who they are
Yeah,
right now.
I can agree with that. So, segueing from that, are there Kiths who are inherently good, heavy quotes, or evil, which I'm also calling the Thalane problem?
There's no kiths that are inherently good. I mean, there's boggins
Hmm.
that are the closest, but there's you can definitely have evil boggins or whatever, selfish boggins and all sorts of stuff. But their call of the needy and stuff makes it. It seems Piskies too are a bit on the goodish side. Um,
It also depends again how you're defining good, because if you define
yeah,
honorable as good, then trolls are good, probably.
that's true. Yeah, right. That's my own morality skew.
Yeah.
I don't. Yeah.
And I'm generally not a fan of any character being irredeemable or incorruptible for that
Hmm.
matter. So my gut answer is no,
Yeah.
we can't make these absolute
Yeah. No, and
comments.
you can't make an absolute, but I think there is some leanings on the good. But on the evil side, if we're talking about all kiths, not just Kithane,
Well, the Thalane problem, I mean, that's the
yes, the
issue.
Thalane problem.
Well, I'll tell you my take, which is that
Yeah.
when I've seen, and I know you've had players actually play Thalane,
Yeah.
when I've seen Thalane kind of floated as characters, there's elements of redemption. Like people want to have redemption as part of the story often.
Oh,
And
okay.
redemption is an arc, not a quality. So yeah, you can make a Thalane who's conflicted and determined to change or whatever, just as easily as you can make a Kithane who is.
Hmm.
But I don't think we can start from a place of Thalane are exactly like Kithane in terms of how their Fey side interacts with the human side.
Yep.
Because they're born of nightmare in a way that the Kithane are not, fundamentally. So they're starting from that different
What about red
position.
caps?
But even red caps, like the way that they're presented, like mechanically, the Thalane are starting in a different position.
Yeah, especially in C20.
Yeah. So the whole struggling against their nature thing is happening along an entirely different vector.
Yeah, but I do think there's a huge spectrum among like, first of all, I think I'm different from a lot of role playing, especially younger gamers, where I'm like, I don't see the importance that my morality lines up with the morality of the player characters in this game.
Mm-hmm.
So like I could see a game where somebody's playing a Ghost and I'm fine with playing this game potentially. Maybe not a Beastie, but a Ghost, yeah.
Oh, beasties are fun.
Not Beastie, sorry. What am I saying? Beastie. I was
Nasties.
thinking Beastie. Nasty.
Yeah,
That's what I was
nasties
thinking.
are less
No,
fun.
Beasties I have done. Yeah. But yeah, Ghosts. Yeah, actually, Beasties in Goblins I find very easy. Lurks. I mean, lurks aren't the moral issue. The issue with lurks is why would they be in a player character group?
Yeah,
Um,
bogeys are easy.
yeah,
Just gotta
bogeys are easy.
drink your phlegm and move on.
Yeah, it's just a freaking vampire game at that point.
Yeah.
But yeah, like Ghasts are hard to see. You know, I could see a game where people playing Ghasts, but I cannot see a good Ghast easily. Like,
Again, though, I could see a character or I could see a player trying to make that their arc.
yeah,
And I think it is rich material for a story, especially when you factor in the prejudices Kithane have about the Thalane.
yeah,
So, like, say you get a situation where a Thalane from the Shadow Court shows up at the Freehold saying they want to defect. Can or should the Kithane trust them? Even if they're operating in
hmm
good faith, they still have those icky parts of their nature. So, is it right for the so called good Fae to forbid them from following those? Like, it's a bunch of
yeah,
interesting questions that I think if you are going to include a Thalian in a story, you should hash out.
yeah. The way I would actually want to approach that, and I know systematically it's not a well handled, but I would treat that redemption arc as also a fall to banality.
Interesting.
So, like, if you're a Ghost who wants to become a super nice person,
Got to get undone to do
you're
it.
probably going to end up going through the forgetting. Yep.
Of course, that also raises a separate metaphysical question of how much does the Fey soul influence what they're like as a human person when their Fey
Yeah.
side isn't active?
Definitely less than when they're aware of things. So I'm not saying it would probably always have the dark urges and stuff, but
Yeah.
that's how I would want to see that character, and I think that would be a proper redemption arc because, like, to me, that's an actual moral question. If you just go through and now you're a boggin, like, that's just not as interesting a story to me. But
The uninteresting story to me, though, is when someone wants to play a Thalane simply to have a justification to be cruel or gross as a character. Like, that feels one-dimensional to me. That's like when someone plays chaotic evil in D&D just so they can be a murder hobo. I'm like, all right.
I could see wanting to do it where, like, I would actually still play a highly ethical, might be the wrong word, something that looks like kind of like ethics but is very evil. Does that make any sense? Like a strict code of behavior
Dexter?
and or virtues, like evil virtues, or I mean that's the Nefandi problem too, from Mage. But
It's like that meme panel from with Spider-Man and Sauron the
yeah,
pterodactyl with like, you can edit genes on the fly. You could cure cancer. And he's like, I don't want to cure cancer. I want to turn people into dinosaurs.
yeah. But a bit also be like, okay, I'm going to set aside my own personal well-being and make my life difficult and really strive and sacrifice to help make the world a worse place. That kind of character could be interesting to me in a group where everybody's on board with that type of thing. But
And that sounds like a Fomorian devotee to the T.
yep.
A lot of this also, I suppose, we could hash this out for the Dauntain as well, especially the
hmm
way the C20 Dauntain are presented. But what you lose in the exchange is the nature of, well, I don't want to get into the nature of free will, but because the
hmm
Dauntain are fundamentally broken in an essential
Yeah.
way, you kind of lose that angle of moral
Yeah.
exploration.
I mean, that's the point where, like, I'm borderline like trying to use safety tools to nope out of the C20 Dante, and I find it very uncomfortable for me and a morally
Yeah.
difficult to have those in games, I think.
Coming up soon, our episode on things that we like and dislike about C20
hmm
changes.
Or many episodes potentially. Oh, this is a big book.
Yeah.
Anyway.
So another listener question that is vaguely related to this, I guess, but Yorubi first asks, a moral dilemma that I've seen actually put off some people from playing is the very nature of the changeling way. The Fae that become changelings are literally possessing babies and merging with their souls, so are changelings spiritual parasites? Is this a sort of demon possession situation? Ignoring the Arcadian she for a moment here.
Yeah.
And I think it's relevant to that question of inherency, but we have so little data on what the soul is and how the changeling way interacts with it.
From my interpretation of anything for the changeling way is, however it worked, it was generally done a very long time ago.
Yes.
Like, assuming you weren't just became an autumn fae this life, however that worked, I don't know. But, like, assuming you had these past lives, it was way back then when whatever happened, when you actually went through the changeling way. And now you just develop like a human does, but you have a fae soul, kind of.
Yeah.
Or half a fae soul. Or...
And we do know that different groups approached it differently with, in some cases, what seems on the surface like quote unquote better ways to do it. So I guess you can kind of set it up however your game demands it, but
yeah.
It's
not even entirely clear that there actually was a soul merging, and it's not whatever the soul is, changelings just have a fae soul, but a human body. That is one interpretation.
Yeah, I've always taken it as they have a changeling soul in a human body, but yeah, either way.
But no, it could be that too. But yeah, so at most it's like an original sin type thing. It's like a thing you did a very long time ago, but
you had no choice in the matter, a certain sense.
Well, that's actually a thing that Demon the Fallen we talked about.
No,
we talked about Demon the Fallen. No, but it does come up in Demon the Fallen, and I guess this could be relevant to Arcadian Chi. The low torment demons who are nicer, some of them have. So they were really messed up, horrible monsters who possess a human body and now are part human, and they have this human morality, and now they feel really guilty about what they did, but it's done. They can't bring the human soul back.
Right.
It's not like they're just possessing a person. They've destroyed the human part. And that could be it for Changeling too. Maybe a Changeling does feel bad about it, but they probably didn't feel bad about it when they were a fae doing it. So
they feel real bad when the tithes show up.
Yeah.
I do want to also step outside this question for a minute because, yeah, of course, that idea of are changeling spiritual parasites, when you have hunters in the game, that's certainly their perspective. But I just want to say, and you can call this a soapbox moment or what you will, if there's a player who expresses hesitation about, if that's their perspective on how this works, I do feel like it's important getting outside the game to talk about how historically the idea of changelings have been used as an excuse to treat people in cruel or horrific ways, up to and including murder, and framed with that kind of language for anything that's like non-normative behavior, ascribing that non-normative behavior to impurity that must be punished or exercised. And I feel comfortable asserting for a fact that that's not the player approach that the creators had in mind at all.
Yeah. And actually, we'll be touching on that more in our ableism and
yes, absolutely,
disability episode.
Yeah.
But yeah, and that's the thing too, like, I think Changeling's open enough that at the table, you can have one player who chose for their character to make them this parasite and another player for chosen character to make them not. And I think both are valid even at the same table.
Yeah.
You might have questions for why these two people are hanging out together, but Changeling, actually, that's a thing you have to address a lot in Changeling too. So
I'd be real curious to see the crosstabs of how many people feel that way about Changeling are totally fine with playing a vampire, but that's a separate question.
Yeah.
Anyway, moving away from
yeah, it is possible to be a Changeling and actually be a good person, and I'm totally cool with it. As much as I say, the monsters, but like I want to leave it room open for monsters, and I want to have it where it's like this big tent, and like your character has to be okay with hanging out with monsters.
Yeah.
Or else you're not really going to be part of Changeling society.
And lest we forget, the whole point of the World of Darkness is that the humans are the real monsters too. So
yes.
A few more general things. How might these questions be useful or used in a story? At the very least, they help develop characters, both the player characters and the STs, especially antagonists. I don't know how you feel about introducing moral dilemmas as a complicating factor in the conflict for games, but I love it.
I do that, especially when I'm playing.
Yeah.
As opposed to running. Look, actually, running, I do it too. I like creating... I like that. I love those stories. I like doing it, and most people I play with like those stories where you're in a situation that at least appears to be no-win, and either somebody ends up taking something... there was all options were bad and they do something bad and now we all feel bad about it, but that was our goal. We wanted to. Or somebody comes up with the, wait, what? You actually solved the no-win scenario? And like now everything's good? Like that, that also is uplifting. Like, I love those things. So
I think in the show notes I might drop links to clips from about 12 different Deep Space Nine episodes, just as, fodder.
yeah. Pale Moonlight
For
is a good
example,
one.
Duet.
Yeah.
But for Changeling specifically, I think that introducing these kinds of questions really emphasizes that theme of balance, particularly between humanity and
Hmm.
inhumanity. And I think we've discussed before how some players seem to like putting more weight on the latter and saying it's justified because this is a game about monsters, but this isn't vampire. And the capital P point is finding balance. Changeling to me is about
Yeah.
balance.
But if it's about balance, doesn't mean everyone has to be balanced. It could also
No,
be
of
about
course, of
imbalance
course.
as a thing.
But that's like the point of reference that I at least want players to have. And to return to complaints about C20, I'm bummed that the rework of the Shirine in the player's guide seems to have minimized that
Hmm.
aspect of them.
Yeah.
So
Yeah, they're now about. Yeah.
yeah, they're about mantles and encapsulating mythemes. But I think that working through moral decisions is one way to showcase the struggle of that balance at a level
Hmm.
in addition to any struggle they feel purely as humans.
Yeah. Although with the Sinushin, as opposed to the Golconda vampire equivalent, I would never have really highlighted morality as being as important for them
That's
as.
fair. Yeah. Well, they almost have to kind of keep two moralities exactly in check at the same time in a certain way. They don't have to be moral, but
Mhm.
they have to keep their human morality and their fey morality exactly at the same level,
Yeah.
whatever those two things entail.
Hmm.
Nobody said Changeling was easy, or if they did, they're wrong.
You're like, okay, well, let's see. I'm a brutal psychopath on my human side, but I'm a red cap, so I have to be like really meek.
Well, speaking of red caps, there's a
Yeah.
couple more audience questions here that didn't fit quite so easily into these buckets, but Ruguru also asks, does the red cap compulsion to consume always override the fact that many grow up in a culture where eating people is frowned on?
Absolutely not. It does not override
No.
that.
Even though they can eat people and they may threaten to eat people, that doesn't mean they like to
Yeah.
eat people.
The interesting thing with red caps is, unlike some of the other kiths, there's things making them, they're hungry all the time.
Yeah.
But the only mechanical thing is other people don't like them. There's nothing forcing their actions mechanically, and I think the player having a fair amount of agency with a red cap character is important.
Yeah.
Like, it's up to you if your character's gonna eat somebody. So
And a carburetor still has more iron than a human arm, so they can just eat that instead.
Mm.
Or actually, no, I guess
Well,
they
they don't
can't
want
eat
to eat
that.
the iron.
Well, I don't know how carburetors work.
One of the things I liked about Kith Book Red Caps, and I think most of the book was about this, is about this sort of thing.
Yeah, that's true. They like to talk a good game. They're all bark and no bite. Well, they're more bark than bite.
No, they are bite. They bark more than they bite. Is probably what you'd say. But like, they definitely feel things. They definitely would feel urges, but that doesn't mean they have to act on them. Which means when they do act on them, they chose to act on them.
That being said, eating someone is different than biting off a limb, and I think they'd find the latter less problematic. As long as they spit it out, maybe. I don't know.
Really?
Like, if they just chomp someone in combat, I don't think they're going to feel particularly guilty about it, but they're not going to like sit
I
down.
think that I think most of them would swallow though.
No, maybe. They're still hungry.
Yeah.
The last one I have on my list is Terry also asks, to what extent do Chimera and Adine have a right to exist? I presume this depends on where an individual Fae draws the line of sentience. And I'd
Hmm.
suggest that all of them would agree the Adine at least have a right, because they're full kiss. They just don't happen to have consistently fleshy bodies.
Well, there's sort of two parts to this right to exist. There's, is this a person,
Hmm.
right? And there's an ecological question. The dreaming is slowly dying and glamour is dying. Like, you could make an argument that like killing a monstrous chimera is like killing, a tiger
Hmm.
as opposed to. But there is like chimera range from fully intelligent people with perhaps not human, but actually some of them could act quite human, right?
Yeah, yeah,
All the way to like a table.
right.
So
Well, that's where it
it's
gets interesting to me because, like, with the Adine, you have kiths in the same way that, like, if you had a Boggin or a Puka meeting an Aunid or a Karamet, well, Karamet, well, separate
Mhm.
question, but like, there are Boggins and Puka in the dreaming who are not changelings. So it's like if they acknowledge them, then they have to acknowledge there are other kiths that just don't have that much presence in the
Yeah.
autumn world. But the chimera is where it gets interesting when you look at the sentient, or at least persistent, seemingly sentient ones.
There are also things that can talk to you but are essentially chatbots.
Right.
And there are like sentient tables
Yeah.
that are fully thinking and feeling. So that also gets very...
Yeah. And that's the kind of moral dilemma that I like. Maybe not dilemma, but that's what I like to introduce into my games, because some Fae, she, are certainly going to say that any chimera not part of a kith or something isn't entitled to the right to life.
Yeah.
To that point, I really wish that the recent changelingness of the Wolpertinger was highlighted more. So imagine, for example, in some corner of Germany or the Galician Confederation, they've had a traditional Wolpertinger hunt that's been a driving force behind their glamour economy. And now, oh crap, suddenly they're also in human flesh. Like, what does that do?
But that doesn't necessarily mean they're Kithane.
No, but it makes it a lot more complicated.
Yeah.
You know?
Yeah. I like things like you have a very strict, highly, in a sense, ethical Seelie character who absolutely sticks to the letter of the Ashit, who has no problem killing Gallain.
Yeah.
And you have a screw the Ashit punk, like, unseelie character who's like, screw the rules, who's like, no, these are all people. Like, I like that kind of...
Do you think that fundamentally this is a question that falls into the debates in Fae morality? Because from a human perspective, I guess you would argue like anything that has physical substance in the autumn world is subject to the rights to exist as their human side understands it.
I don't think so. I think the Ashit in general is a very Fae thing.
Oh, I mean, aside from the Ashit, I just mean returning to the original question about whether chimera have a right to exist. It's like from a human perspective, that question doesn't even really make sense.
Well, I don't think it depends on human form. Like, is it is it a person? Is it capable of feeling pain and thinking and all that? That'd be the human concern, I guess. You know, we meet aliens. Are they alien bacteria or are they alien people? Like, that's...
It's interesting though to see those points of like overlap, like the human perspective on purely Fae questions and vice versa. And I think that the first ones are the ones we see a lot more of, maybe for obvious reasons. I'm curious to see if Exalted the Fair Folk kind of inverts that, but that's for another episode.
Sorry, what was the question about the...
Well, like, so I think Changeling presents a lot more human morality perspectives on Fae-centric issues, and we don't get as much of Fae moral opinions on human-centric issues.
Exalted the Fair Folk, you could argue whether or not it would be the Changeling Fae perspectives, but it's definitely a Fae set of Fae perspectives.
Useful, though. Because we don't get much true Fae perspective in Changeling.
Yeah, they're a lot less human than the Atine, for sure.
Weirdly, I wonder if like that time of judgment scenario where the Tuatha come back and start slaughtering all the changelings might be instructive.
Oh, yeah, I would treat the Tuatha as just as inhuman as the Fomorians, just very different.
Yeah.
In the way that they're inhuman.
What does their morality look like?
That could be the super strict codes to the letter in an inhuman way and like following the Ashit to the letter and all that. Yeah.
You swore an oath. Here's the text.
Yeah.
Yeah.
It's like, oh, you dishonored yourself. I'm now morally required to kill you because you did bad in your spelling bee. And it brought shame on your family.
Have we said enough about morality for the time being? Again, this is one of those things where I don't even know if we're scratching the surface. We're like skimming off the surface.
Yeah.
But
we will, I don't think we'll do another full episode only about morality.
No.
And season 6, we do a detailed criminal justice and Concordia episode or something.
Our actual graduate school curriculum on Changeling the Dreaming.
Yep. But yeah, so if you want to keep finding us, you can go to changelingthepodcast.com. You can join our Discord to discuss all these weighty moral issues. Discord.me/CTP. Join our Facebook page, Changeling the Podcast. Check us out on YouTube, where all our episodes also get uploaded very quickly after. For Changeling the Podcast. You send us a toot, changelingpod@dice.camp, and send us an email. What's our email again?
Podcast@changelingthepodcast.com.
Yep.
And links to all of these will be in the show notes.
Yep. And once again, I'm Josh.
I debatably remain Puka.
And you have the categorical imperative to listen to our next episode.
Wheel of morality, turn, turn, turn. Tell us the lesson that we must learn.
In a fit of pique, we decided that we should give up this whole podcast thing and instead begin work on Law and Order Concordia, a television program where two detectives, the troubled but brilliant Beaumain rich kid who once watched four redcaps carjack a unicorn chariot, and the tough-as-nails troll who's been on the force 20 years but still has a lot to learn about love, solve crimes involving the Fae. Each episode will be chock full of guest stars and surprise revelations and dramatic musical motifs, and each story will involve a new kith, so we reckon we can get at least 4 solid seasons out of this. We'll probably get about 3/4 of the way through a pilot script before giving up and returning to form, but in the meantime, if you'd like to support these and other Changeling-related creative endeavors, please consider signing up for our Patreon at www.patreon.com/changelingthepodcast. Current patrons get a shout-out of thanks at the end of each episode, like so: Derek, Dorcadus, Elorus, Iabol, Jason Vines, Oreo, Raz Caboose, Sandjigger, Sija, Terry Robinson, and Tricerabeth. Special thanks to them all. We hope you'll leave us a review on the podcast listening platform of your greatest convenience if it's not too much of an ethical quandary for us to ask you to do so. For now, we'll leave you to wrangle with your conscience over these and other matters, but until next time, keep on dreaming.